For those who are here and to our speaker and moderator, I want to welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Amy Krupel. I'm the director of the UF Center for European Studies. Our center is a Department of Education Title VI National Resource Center and a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. We are a multidisciplinary area and language studies center housed in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Florida. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's discussion will be recorded and it will be available on the UFCES website. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation, and participants can submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. We do ask that you submit via the Q&A button rather than the chat function. This helps us to manage questions. I want to thank you again for joining us today. Our discussion is on spies and counterspies in East German comics. This presentation and the series of which it is part are directly funded by the Department of Education. And this discussion is part of our CES European Studies Because series, drawing on the past superheroes, comics, and propaganda. The series explores non-traditional approaches to the study of Europe. And these three talks, one last semester, this talk, and one forthcoming talk, all focus on the use of the medium of comics to explore different topics in European studies. The last talk will be next Tuesday, and for more details, please visit ces.ufl.edu. Our speaker today is Professor Michael Schultz. He is a professor at the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Uppsala University. Dr. Schultz's research focuses on cartoons as instruments for propaganda and indoctrination, the German-Scandinavian relationship during the 20th century, and exile and re-immigration. Dr. Schultz has published many articles and book chapters, including a chapter in Comics of the New Europe, which is what he is speaking on today. We are fortunate to have our moderator back with us. She has graciously agreed to moderate the full service. Dr. Ulanovic is Director of Graduate Student Teaching and General Education, as well as an Associate Professor in UF's Department of English. Her research is primarily focused on the representation of intergenerational relationships and memory in children's literature and graphic narratives. Just a reminder to everyone, there is a survey at the end of this talk. When you leave, you will be automatically taken there. And we very much appreciate you taking a few minutes to complete the survey so that we can continue to best serve everyone's interests. And with that, I'm going to hand the virtual microphone over to Professor Schultz for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the presentation. I should certainly add that I grew up in East Berlin and that I do know many of the comics, the East German comics, by having read them at that time. Already in the late 1980s, I started serious research about East German comics, and that gave me the possibility to interview several East German comic creators now deceased and to collect original material and artwork as well. It's a great honor for me to be part of this series here, drawing on the past and to speak about this part of my research. You've heard of other parts as well. You just started Holocaust studies. And but I like this here very much about comic strips, because studying and even teaching history by reading and analyzing comics as historical sources is very useful and will stimulate critical thinking and practice in historical source criticism. Eastern Europe in general, and including the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, in existence between 1949 and 1990 with about 17 million inhabitants, had been considered to be terra incognita comics-wise. And that for a long time, because of the ideological boundaries and due to lack of focus on popular media of this type, Eastern Europe was cut away from developments in this field of comic studies. This is changing now, and the last year's research brought to light many surprises, as for example, there are East German comics. I had published widely about the history of East German comics already in the 1990s, but not so much in English. Last year, the first book in English that I know, providing an analysis of the East German comics as part of popular culture and leisure time, was published for Color Communism. That is Chernides' dissertation from Carleton University, Ottawa, 2016, now even available as ebook. Today, I will present a selection of East German comics, especially comics with images of spies and counterspies. I want to show how the communist regime used comics as means of propaganda. The Communist Party, SED, and the Communist Youth Organization, Free German Youth, controlled all publishing and editing. Comics were used as means of state and party propaganda, but had an entertainment function as well. As non-mandatory reading, they reached many readers, and so they had part in framing a worldview and defining a sense of self in the East German generations who have grown up with them. Studying these comics can give you a deeper understanding of life in a dictatorship. Before we will look at my selection of comics with spy images, I want to give you an idea about in which traditions the East German comics creators saw themselves or were engaged to. They were not overstuffed by modern foreign influences and comic traditions, at least not from American comics. The international anti-comics debate regarding the corrupting influence of comics had in the 1950s come to East German as well, and it was widely used in the anti-American propaganda. Especially comic books from America were considered to be poison, and this view was held by parent representatives in East and West. No Superman, no Prince Valiant, perhaps a Disney style could be tolerated. East German cartoonists worked in the line of the German Bilderbogen tradition. Popular color prints widely distributed in the 19th century with combined pictures and words, sometimes in a sequential order with topics ranging from satirical to educational. In 1955, two of the most beloved East German comic creators, Richard Hambach and Jürgen Kieser, described in the 2 years earlier started youth magazine Fröhlich sein und singen, Frösi, be happy and sing, the traditions I wanted for the picture stories to come. These stories should be based on silent strips, not only from Germany, but also from Sweden, Denmark, and Poland, as listed here, and even visualized here. It was the German Max und Moritz, what we call for the first one, the Swedish Adamson, very popular in the Weimar Republic as well. The cartoons from the Danish communist Herluf Bistrup. He had started already before the war, and he was now in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, the main cartoonist for the Danish communist newspaper. Erich Oser's Vater und Sohn, a comic from the Berliner Illustrierte, and the Polish comic Professor Filutek, and Maxine Pfiffig, Max Smart by Richard Hambach. But comics from the West were very popular in both parts of Berlin because of the open border in Berlin due to the four power status of the old capital. Comics from West found their way to East German young readers as well. And the Communist Party and the youth organizations discussed measures against trashy and obscene literature. The prevention of the infiltration of such literature, as well as the creation of quality literature, became major concerns. It was a well-known German writer, Ludwig Renn, who at that moment proposed to counter so-called comics from the West, not only by banning them, but also through, quote, the manufacturing of superficially similar products, which he wanted to call picture stories in order to differentiate the socialist comics from similar Western publications. Renn was convicted of the didactic potential of the word image medium as a result of his visit to China and the subsequent discovery of Chinese picture stories and the central role as pedagogical tools in the service of communist culture and politics. Renn suggested to create graphic narratives in collaboration with artists in such a way that they would be acceptable to both parts of Germany. Direct propaganda should be avoided, class struggles from history rather than the present should be depicted. His suggestion fell on fertile ground. In East Germany, comics were given now space in the dailies and weeklies. Magazines for children and young adults with comics were published, with two purely comic-based magazines published from 1955 onwards. Even if the comics were developed as a form of entertainment, they became tools for propaganda almost immediately. The cartoonists' possibilities to express themselves were limited by the regime's educational system and the communist ideology as well. But nevertheless, we still find interesting East German comics, diverse in their approach and style. Most important were the youth magazine Fröhlich sein und singen, also be happy and sing, with a significant